It would be weird to send a generic holiday card when you are a professional illustrator. So every year comes the challenge and opportunity of creating an original, unique and own holiday card to send to business partners, clients and colleagues and friends and family, of course. This particular holiday card was actually started last year. I didn't manage to do a holiday card last year. There was just too much going on. And this year it was also I was also very tight with time, and I decided to just finish this one. I always start any kind of work with a very, very rough sketch. In this case, I had created some of the character sketches already in my sketchbook with a pencil. So I just scanned them or photographed them, I don't remember, and just copied them in the position where I would imagine the characters to be. The first pass is really extremely rough. It's just a positioning of the elements, a general layout idea of where everything goes. Sometimes I go from here directly to a final drawing, but in this case the drawing was so complicated, especially with all the overlapping elements, that I actually went through an intermediate sketch phase. So during the second drawing, which is still very, very rough, as you can see, I can start to resolve some of the shapes and also some of the layout. You can see that the composition is not finished really, and I was just starting to block in with a little bit more of detail and accuracy some of the elements. It's also the phase where I go hunting for reference. So sometimes I start with reference from the onset, but sometimes the rough sketch and idea already exists, and then I just go look for the reference that supports. Here starting the third pass in a way, but you will see that at some point I will just drop it again because a hole here passed in between starting and finishing this piece. So the first pass of what would have been the final drawing was actually discarded and started again. Yeah, this is the phase where I abandoned it, and then I started almost exactly a year later, I started redrawing with, you can see, a different type of brush, and I just put the whole sketch back onto a transparent or semi-transparent layer and started redrawing everything again. So this is actually the proper final drawing. At this stage, I knew already I would keep the line because keeping the line is just a faster process, and I really had very, very little time. I think the whole piece was finished in a day, or a couple of hours drawing, maybe 2 or 3 hours of drawing, and then a day of painting, so 6-7 hours of painting. So I knew already that I wouldn't have time to eliminate the line work. So when I know already the line work is going to stay, I'm going to invest more time in getting clean lines, in getting some kind of line movement, in getting the shapes correct with the line, so that I don't need to rework that later. When I know that I will paint over and the lines are going to disappear, I don't invest all this care in the line work. This was done in ProCreate, and I think it's just the normal ProCreate pencil 6B that I'm using, which is my standard go-to pencil for drawing in ProCreate, and it's actually probably one of the best for me, and my particular style is one of the best drawing tool there exists, including Photoshop. There is not a single pencil in Photoshop I could find that has the same kind of behavior as the ProCreate pencil 6B. It's by far the best pencil drawing tool I could find for my personal preferences. It's very sharp. It's very black, so it makes a nice, strong line. But at the same time, it has this nice pencil texture, so it's not a continuous line like an inking tool. It really looks like a pencil. So here we go to the choice of the palette. It was important for me not to go with a classic Christmas palette, greens and reds. And actually, I picked the palette. There was a newsletter from one of the creative portals I follow that discussed the colors for the winter 2020 and the Christmas 2020. And it was basically navy blue, gold, and cream. And I thought, why not? Navy blue, gold, and cream is very elegant. It's unusual for Christmas, and it looks still very festive. So that's what I started with. But I had to add the reds in because of the reindeers and Santa having a traditional red coat. So I also added some warm colors to the palette, kind of orangey red and some orangey and yellow-orange, very light colors, not rich reds, but something a little bit more subdued for the reindeers. So I start, this is not always my process, but it's one of my standard processes. I start blocking in the shapes with one base color. In this case, I chose the blue. And this is just to create a base color and block in the shape of the various elements of the picture, regardless of what their final color will be. A base color is something I use quite often, and then I add the actual local colors on top with a brush that has some texture that lets the base color shine through. This is a trick that I learned from classical painting to achieve a color vibrance that you wouldn't obtain by just using a color straight on. And it works best if the base color is a complementary of the colors that go on top, or a near complementary. Of course, with a colorful piece like that, it doesn't really matter. All of it will have some element of complementary to the blue or an analogy, but it will still contribute to color vibrance. As you see, I then go on top with the local colors. It's extremely rough. It's really no more than a rough color sketch. This is a piece, as I said, that had to be finished within a few hours. So there was no time either to set up layers or to do a color study. I just went straight into painting, and it's a very, very fast approach. I added the smoke with some kind of watercolor brush, and then finished off the shadows and the lights, still keeping everything very rough. So the shadows are on a multiply layer and the lights on either a screen or a linear add or a color dodge layer. I vary among those. So this is all super, super rough. The biggest part, like all of this, it's probably taking, I say, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half to get to this stage. So you can see the proportion of the amount of time that is actually spent on the paintings. I would say up to this stage, it was probably overall less than 4 hours. And from now on, it's all detailing. And detailing is the part that takes the longest. I've put the lines, I've reduced the transparency of the lines. I don't like the lines to be very strong. And I think I also colored, I definitely colored them in either a blue or a red color to sort of match the color mood of the piece so that they wouldn't stand out as black lines. And then now it's time to go in and detail everything. And this is definitely the most time-consuming aspect of the whole piece. So the remaining of the time-lapse is a lot of detail. Detail work means cleaning up all the edges, cleaning up adding all the patterns on the present paper, adding all the details of the bows and the ribbons, cleaning up the shadows, the highlights, especially on the golden paper. The highlights come in at this stage. They're very easy to do. Gold is probably one of the easiest things to paint because basically you start with a very desaturated dark yellow and then you hit it with a color dodge and screen and you get gold almost immediately. It's super easy to paint digitally. I went in cleaning. I mean, this is not the most efficient way of painting, and it's definitely not a way of painting that is conducive to revisions. So it's not how I would paint a professional piece, because if I'm working with an art director, I have to be ready for changes to be made up to the final stages. And so I cannot really just paint all on one layer like in this case. So this whole piece is done with one layer. There is no separate layer for the pencil. There is no separate layer for individual elements. It's all painted on one canvas and one layer. Whenever I need to add a layer to add special things like light effects or so, I immediately condense it down to one layer before going on. It's much more efficient in terms of time. It leads to a piece that is more spontaneous and easier to manage overall. You don't spend time nominating the layers, making sure that you're painting on the right layer, which for me it's a catastrophe. I always end up painting on the wrong layer at some point of any piece. And this just makes it very easy and very relaxing. So I could actually lay in bed and just paint in ProCreate on the iPad as if I was sketching in my sketchbook without any second thought. It's a personal piece. It's not going to go under any revision or editing process. So it doesn't need to be editable or to remain editable in any way. And that's the nice thing of personal work. Is probably it allows you to experiment with more spontaneous way of painting, because you don't have to think about making revisions. At the very end, I added some dust, fixed a few expressions and mistakes. If you look carefully, you see the reindeers, especially in the back, are barely finished. It's really nothing more than line and a little bit of colors, but very little rendering. There is a lot more rendering on Santa's face because it's the focal point, and of course on Rudolph's face, on the presents and the health and the car, but it's still quite a rough piece from my point of view, from the way I normally would work, but it works overall. It's consistent in itself. It looks finished. And because this was done specifically for sending digital cards, I don't have to worry about printing it in a large format and having the level of accuracy or precision and detail that is needed for printing on large scale. So it didn't need to be finished more than this. It was a fun piece to do. I enjoyed it, especially taking a day off from deadline work to be able to do this piece. And I hope you enjoyed seeing the time lapse and you could learn something from it.